The gunshot echoed through the glass-walled boardroom before anyone could move. Preston Blackwood's hand jerked toward Dominic Sterling Frost, the Glock 19 steady despite the chaos erupting around them. Savannah Grace Hartwell threw herself between the barrel and the man in the wheelchair, her shoulder taking the impact meant for his chest. Blood bloomed across her white blouse as she crumpled. Dominic's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, and then something impossible happened. He rose. 2 years of paralysis shattered in 3 strides as he crossed the polished mahogany floor and drove his fist into Preston's jaw with the force of every stolen month, every lie, every betrayal. The image froze, shattered, rewound. 72 hours earlier, Dominic Frost sat in the same boardroom, very much seated, very much in control. The morning sun cut through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor, illuminating the faces of 8 senior executives who had learned long ago not to mistake his wheelchair for weakness. The topic was predictable: ethics, compliance, and artificial intelligence development. The stakes were not. Michael Chen from Legal droned through slide 17 when Dominic raised one finger. The presentation stopped mid-sentence. The question isn't whether our facial recognition software can identify suspects faster than human officers. The question is whether we've built adequate safeguards against racial bias in the training data. Show me the audit results from the independent review, not the marketing deck. Chen's face reddened. He fumbled with his laptop. Dominic waited, counting the seconds of silence. 15, 20. The answer was already clear. We don't have those results yet, sir. The review is still in progress. Then we don't ship. Delay the Pentagon contract 3 months if necessary. I won't build the next generation of surveillance tools on a foundation that disproportionately targets communities of color. End of discussion. 3 executives shifted in their seats. The CFO, Preston Blackwood, leaned forward with that concerned expression he'd perfected over a decade of friendship turned professional partnership. Dom, that's a $40 million contract. Our competitors will eat that lunch while we're busy being noble. Dominic's gray eyes locked onto Preston's without blinking. Then let them choke on it. This company was built on one principal technology that serves humanity, not the other way around. If you've forgotten that, Preston, there's the door. The room fell silent. Preston smiled, but the warmth never reached his eyes. He nodded slowly, making a show of jotting notes on his legal pad. The meeting continued. 20 minutes later, Dominic dismissed them all and rolled himself to the window. The wheelchair was a Permobil F5 Corpus, top of the line, responsive to the slightest touch. He'd customized it himself after the 3rd physical therapist had given up trying to motivate him toward recovery. The modifications included reinforced titanium spokes, military-grade battery capacity, and a hidden compartment beneath the seat containing files he trusted to no cloud server. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother in Denver. "Call me when you can. Love you, sweetheart." He smiled despite himself. Catherine Frost had refused to treat him differently after the accident, which meant she still nagged him about eating vegetables and finding a nice girl to settle down with. As if paraplegia from the waist down hadn't complicated that particular aspiration. He typed back, "Ate a salad yesterday, does that buy me a week?" Her response came instantly, 2 days. Don't push your luck. The office cleared out by 6. Dominic stayed until 9, reviewing code repositories for the AI ethics audit that Legal claimed was still in progress. It wasn't. The files had been completed 3 weeks ago and buried in a subdirectory labeled Archive 2019. The results were damning. The facial recognition software showed a 23% higher false positive rate for black suspects compared to white ones. Marketing had known. Legal had known. Preston had definitely known. Dominic forwarded the files to the board with a single-line email, "Meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. mandatory." Then he rolled himself to the elevator and descended to the parking garage where his modified Tesla waited. The hand controls felt like extensions of his own body now. Strange how 2 years could transform a nightmare into routine. The drive home took 40 minutes through evening traffic. His penthouse in Back Bay had been retrofitted with every accessibility feature money could buy, but he rarely used most of them. Pride, probably. Or stubbornness. The physical therapists had used both words frequently before he'd fired them. All 5 of them. The last one had lasted 6 weeks before she'd thrown up her hands and declared him the most obstinate patient she'd ever encountered. "You have a 30% chance of regaining some mobility if you commit to the program, Mr. Frost. 30%. But you have to actually try." He'd shown her the door with the same finger he'd used to silence Michael Chen. Trying meant hoping. Hoping meant disappointment. Better to master what he had than chase what he'd lost. The penthouse was dark when he entered. He preferred it that way. Lights came on automatically as he moved through the space motion sensors, tracking his path from entryway to kitchen to the home gym that had become his sanctuary. 2 hours every night. Weights, resistance bands, boxing against a heavy bag mounted low enough to reach from the chair. The Navy SEAL who'd designed his program had promised it would maintain upper body strength and cardiovascular health. It did. It also exhausted him enough to sleep without dreams of falling from the sky. At 11:30, he showered and transferred to the bed. Sleep came in fragments. At 2 a.m., he woke to review files on his tablet. Not work files, personal ones. The investigation he had been conducting in secret for 23 months. The helicopter crash had been ruled mechanical failure. Catastrophic rotor blade malfunction during a routine flight from Boston to the company's research facility in New Hampshire. The Bell 407 had dropped 3,000 feet in 18 seconds. Dominic remembered every one of them. The alarms, the spinning, the impact that had shattered 3 vertebrae and stolen his legs but somehow spared his life. The NTSB report cited metal fatigue in the Jesus nut, the single bolt holding the rotor assembly to the mast. A 1 in 10 million failure, they'd said. Tragic, but unavoidable. Dominic had never believed in 1 in 10 million coincidences, not when the failure happened 6 weeks after he'd refused to sell Frost Technologies to a Chinese conglomerate for $8 billion. Not when the maintenance logs showed the helicopter had been serviced the day before by a contractor whose credentials had turned out to be falsified. Not when the lead NTSB investigator had retired early and moved to the Cayman Islands 3 months after closing the case. He'd hired Jackson Cole 2 months ago. Former FBI Boston field office, 20 years investigating corporate espionage before going private. Jackson didn't come cheap, and he didn't make promises he couldn't keep. So far, he'd traced the maintenance contractor to a shell company in Delaware that had dissolved the week after the crash. Dead end. But Jackson was patient. So was Dominic. The tablet screen showed dashcam footage from the helicopter recovered from the wreckage. Dominic had watched it 400 times. Tonight would be 401. The video was clear until the moment everything went wrong. Then static. But in frame 1247, just before the static hit, something caught the light. A reflection off the rotor housing. A straight edge where there should have been a curve. He'd sent the enhanced image to 3 independent metallurgists. All 3 had said the same thing possible, saw mark consistent with deliberate weakening of the blade mount. Possible. Not definite. Not proof. But enough to keep digging. Sleep finally came around 4 a.m. The alarm woke him at 7. Coffee, shower, another day. The boardroom filled by 7:50. Preston arrived last, coffee in hand, wearing the same genial smile that had made him Dominic's right hand for a decade. They'd met at MIT, 2 kids from nowhere trying to build something that mattered. Preston had handled the money while Dominic built the technology. It had worked beautifully until the day Dominic's helicopter fell from the sky. "You wanted to see us bright and early, Dom? What's the crisis?" Dominic opened his laptop and projected the ethics audit onto the main screen. "The crisis is that someone in this room has been lying to me for 3 weeks about software that could ruin lives if we ship it as designed." Michael Chen went pale. Preston set down his coffee very slowly. "We were planning to address those issues before launch, Dom. The audit was supposed to be preliminary, not final." "Then why was it filed in an archive folder labeled 2019? Why did marketing send me a launch timeline yesterday that shows we're shipping in 6 weeks? And why, Preston, did you approve a $40 million Pentagon contract knowing our software has a bias problem we haven't solved?" Preston's jaw tightened. For just a second, something cold flickered behind his eyes. Then the warmth returned, calculated and precise. Because sometimes we have to trust our team to solve problems in parallel instead of sequentially. You built this company on innovation, Dom. That means taking risks. Not risks that destroy people's lives. Not risks that turn our technology into a weapon against the communities we're supposed to serve. I'm shutting down the Pentagon deal until we pass an independent audit with zero bias tolerance. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave now. No one moved. Preston nodded slowly, making another note on his legal pad. The meeting adjourned at 8:30. By 9, Dominic's assistant had drafted the contract termination letter and sent it to the Department of Defense with profuse apologies and a commitment to re-engage when the product met ethical standards. By 10, Preston had requested a private meeting. Dominic made him wait until 2. They sat in Dominic's office, the harbor spread out behind them like a gray mirror. Preston wore his concerned friend face, the one that had probably practiced in a mirror until it looked sincere. I'm worried about you, Dom. You've been pushing yourself too hard since the accident. Maybe it's time to think about stepping back, letting the executive team handle day-to-day operations while you focus on recovery. There it was, the opening move. Subtle, caring, poisonous. My legs don't work, Preston. My brain functions just fine. Better, actually, since I'm not wasting energy on bullshit diplomacy. That's what I mean. You're more aggressive now, more isolated. The old Dominic would have trusted his team to make the right call on something like the Pentagon contract. This version just burned $40 million to make a point. Dominic leaned forward, elbows on the armrests of his wheelchair. The old Dominic also thought a 1 in 10 million mechanical failure was just bad luck. This version asks better questions. Preston's expression didn't change, but his pupils dilated. Just for a second. Just enough. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm not the same person who got on that helicopter 2 years ago, and maybe that's not such a bad thing. Preston stood, smoothing his tie. I hope you're right, Dom. I really do. But if you ever want to talk about anything, I'm here. That's what friends do. He left. Dominic sat alone in the silence, counting his heartbeats. 60 per minute. Steady, controlled. The way they'd been in the helicopter right before everything went to hell. His phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He answered on the 3rd ring. Mr. Frost. This is Dr. Ramona Chen from Boston Medical Center. I'm calling about a potential candidate for a unique physical therapy position. Dominic almost hung up. Then curiosity won. I've tried 5 therapists, Dr. Chen. None of them worked out. What makes your candidate unique? Her name is Savannah Hartwell. She's our top specialist in spinal cord injury rehabilitation, and she's about to turn down a $300,000 offer from Mayo Clinic because she won't abandon her current patients. I thought you might appreciate someone who values commitment over compensation. Dominic pulled up Savannah Hartwell's credentials on his laptop while Dr. Chen talked. Harvard undergrad. Physical therapy doctorate from Columbia. Published research on neuroplasticity and incomplete spinal cord injuries. 28 years old and already running the SCY program at one of Boston's top hospitals. Her photo showed a woman with honey blonde hair pulled back in a professional bun, green eyes that looked like they'd seen through every excuse a patient could invent, and a jawline that suggested she didn't accept defeat gracefully. Send me her contact information. I'll think about it. She'll say no at first. Savannah doesn't work with people who hire therapists just to fire them when the work gets hard. You'll have to convince her you're serious. How do you know I'm not? Dr. Chen laughed. Because you're still in that wheelchair, Mr. Frost. If you were serious about recovery, you'd already be walking. She hung up before he could respond. Dominic stared at the phone, then at Savannah Hartwell's credentials, then at his legs. Useless, traitorous, constant reminder of everything he'd lost. Dr. Chen was right. He'd given up. Accepted the chair as permanent. Built his life around limitation instead of possibility. But maybe he'd had a reason. Maybe hoping for recovery meant admitting he'd been robbed of it. And if he'd been robbed, someone had done the robbing. Someone close enough to access his helicopter. Someone who'd benefit from his incapacity. someone like Preston Blackwood. The thought had been circling for months, a vulture he couldn't quite shoot down. Preston, who'd pushed hardest for the Chinese acquisition. Preston, who'd assumed operational control while Dominic recovered. Preston, whose stake in Frost Technologies would skyrocket in value if Dominic stepped aside permanently. Preston, who'd been his friend since they were 20 years old. Dominic closed the laptop, opened it again, stared at Savannah Hartwell's photo until the screen went dark. Then he called the number Dr. Chen had sent. She answered on the first ring. "This is Savannah." Her voice carried the confidence of someone who'd earned every credential the hard way. Dominic cleared his throat. "Ms. Hartwell, my name is Dominic Frost. Dr. Chen suggested I contact you about a physical therapy position." Silence. Then, "I know who you are, Mr. Frost. I also know you've fired 5 therapists in 2 years. Whatever you're paying, it's not enough to deal with a patient who's not committed to his own recovery." "What makes you think I'm not committed?" "Because if you were, you wouldn't need a 6th therapist. You'd still be working with the first one. I appreciate Dr. Chen's referral, but I'm not interested in being dismissed the moment I challenge you to do the hard work." She was about to hang up. Dominic could hear it in her breath, the slight shift in tone that preceded goodbye. "What if I offered you $1 million for 6 months of work?" The silence stretched longer this time. "That's insulting, Mr. Frost. You think I can be bought? I think you have a grandfather with Parkinson's disease and medical bills that your salary can't cover. I think your mother works 2 nursing shifts to help pay for his care. And I think you turned down Mayo Clinic because you won't abandon patients who depend on you, which means you're already sacrificing your financial future for principle. I'm offering you a chance to help your family and keep your principles intact. The only cost is 6 months working with someone who might actually be worth the effort." Another silence. This one felt different, calculating. "You investigated my family. I investigated your credentials. Your family situation was in the background check Dr. Chen provided. So yes, I know you're carrying weight that would crush most people. I'm offering to lighten that load in exchange for honest work. No games, no ego, just a legitimate effort to see if recovery is possible. And if it's not, then at least we'll both know we tried. That's more than I can say now." Savannah Hartwell exhaled slowly. "I'll meet with you. 1 consultation. If I don't think you're serious, I walk and we never speak again. If I do think you're serious, we negotiate terms that include full autonomy over your therapy program. I don't work for patients who second-guess every decision." "Agreed. When and where?" "Your place, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. And Mr. Frost. If you're late, the offer's off the table." She hung up. Dominic sat in his office until the sun set over Boston Harbor, watching light fade from the water and wondering if he'd just made the best decision of his recovery or the worst mistake of his life. The penthouse was spotless by 7:30 the next morning. Dominic had cleaned it himself, refusing to let the housekeeper come early. Pride, probably, or the need to prove he could manage his own space despite the chair. Savannah Hartwell arrived at 7:55, early enough to make a point, but late enough to avoid seeming desperate. She wore navy scrubs and running shoes that had seen serious mileage. Her hair was pulled back in the same practical bun from her photo, but in person her eyes were sharper, greener, more skeptical. She walked through the penthouse like she was cataloging exit routes and structural weaknesses. Dominic watched from his chair, waiting for the assessment he knew was coming. "Nice place. Too nice for someone who's serious about rehabilitation. Where's your gym equipment?" "Down the hall. 2nd door on the left." She walked past him without waiting for permission. He followed irritation and curiosity fighting for dominance. The gym was his sanctuary, the one space he'd designed entirely for function over form. Weight bench, resistance bands, parallel bars he'd never used, the heavy bag he'd punched until his knuckles bled. Savannah walked the perimeter, occasionally touching equipment, testing stability, checking angles. Finally, she turned to face him. "You've built yourself a very efficient upper-body workout facility. What you haven't built is a rehabilitation center. These parallel bars are collecting dust. The resistance bands are set up for strength training, not mobility work. And that heavy bag tells me you're more interested in managing anger than addressing paralysis." So here's my first question, Mr. Frost. Do you want to walk again, or do you want to feel powerful while sitting down? Dominic's hands tightened on the armrests. I want to stop having people tell me what I want. Fair enough. Then let me tell you what I see. I see someone with incomplete spinal cord injury at L1 to L2. I see someone who probably has preserved sensation below the injury site, which means the neural pathways aren't completely severed. I see someone who's spent 2 years building upper body strength instead of working on the neuroplasticity that could restore lower body function. And I see someone who fired 5 therapists because they told you the truth recovery is possible, but it requires humility you're not ready to show. She walked toward the door. Dominic rolled forward, blocking her path. You finished? Not quite. Not. I also see someone who's brilliant enough to build an $8 billion company, but too proud to admit he's scared. The chair isn't your prison, Mr. Frost. Fear is. And until you're ready to fight that instead of your therapists, no amount of money will make a difference. She stepped around him, made it 3 feet before he spoke. I'm scared of hoping. Savannah stopped, didn't turn around. Because hope requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is weakness, and weakness is what put you in that chair in the first place. Did I miss anything? You missed the part where someone might have sabotaged my helicopter because I wouldn't sell my company. You missed the part where trusting people almost got me killed. And you missed the part where every therapist who's walked through that door has looked at me like I'm a tragedy instead of a person. She turned slowly. Her expression had shifted from skepticism to something harder to name. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. If someone sabotaged your helicopter, they didn't put you in that chair. They tried to put you in a grave. The fact that you're sitting here arguing with me means they failed, so stop giving them a second chance by sabotaging yourself. Dominic held her gaze for 10 seconds, then 20. Finally, he rolled backward, clearing her path. You're hired. Same terms we discussed. 6 months. Full autonomy over my program. But I have one condition. Of course you do. If I tell you something happened that seems impossible, you believe me first and question me later. I need someone on my side, not someone who thinks I'm paranoid. Savannah crossed her arms. What kind of impossible things are we talking about? The kind that involve corporate sabotage, false maintenance records, and NTSB investigators who retire to the Caribbean right after closing cases. The kind that make physical therapy the least dangerous part of my day. She studied him for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and typed something quickly. I just sent a message to Dr. Chen telling her I'm taking a 6-month leave of absence. If you're lying to me about any of this, I'm going to make your life more miserable than 5 therapists combined. Clear, crystal. Good. We start tomorrow, 5 a.m., and Mr. Frost. Cancel whatever meetings you have scheduled for the next month. You're about to learn what real work feels like. She left. Dominic sat alone in his gym, staring at the parallel bars he'd ignored for 2 years. His phone buzzed. A text from Jackson Cole. Found something. Call me. He dialed immediately. Jackson's voice was gravel, and cigarettes' 40 years of skepticism compressed into every syllable. I traced the shell company that hired your maintenance contractor. 3 layers deep, but I got there. Want to guess who signed the incorporation papers? Dominic's chest tightened. Tell me. Blackwood Holdings, LLC. Registered in Delaware, dissolved 2 weeks after your crash. The registered agent was Preston Blackwood's college roommate guy named Timothy Shaw. Shaw died in a car accident 4 months ago. Convenient timing. The room tilted. Dominic gripped the armrests until his knuckles went white. You're sure? I'm sure Shaw signed the papers. I'm sure the company paid your helicopter mechanic through an untraceable wire transfer. I'm sure Preston Blackwood benefits most from you being incapacitated. What I'm not sure about is whether we can prove he ordered the sabotage. That's the hard part. Dominic closed his eyes, saw Preston's concerned face from yesterday's meeting, heard his voice. I'm worried about you, Dom. Maybe it's time to step back. Keep digging. I need proof that holds up in court. That could take months, maybe years. And if Blackwood figures out we're investigating, things could get complicated fast. Then we don't let him figure it out. How long before you have something concrete? 2 months minimum. Probably longer. This guy's good at covering tracks. 2 months. I can work with that. He hung up. Sat in the silence, processing information that felt like poison spreading through his veins. Preston, his friend, his partner. The man who'd stood beside him through every triumph and failure for 14 years. The man who'd visited him in the hospital every day for 3 months after the crash, bringing books and coffee and encouraging words. The man who'd tried to kill him. Dominic rolled to the window and stared out at the city he'd helped build, the skyline dotted with offices that ran his software hospitals, that used his medical AI police departments, that deployed his facial recognition tools. Power, influence, money. All of it meaningless if he couldn't trust the person standing next to him. His phone buzzed again. This time a calendar reminder. Board meeting in 2 hours. Preston would be there wearing his concerned friend mask, pretending to care about Dominic's well-being while plotting his next move. Dominic allowed himself 60 seconds of rage. Pure, white-hot fury that made his hands shake and his vision blur. Then he breathed, counted to 10, compartmentalized the anger into a box he could open later when it would be useful. If Preston wanted him weak, he'd give Preston exactly what he expected. A CEO too wounded to fight back. A friend too trusting to suspect betrayal. A man in a wheelchair who'd forgotten how lions hunt. But lions don't announce their attacks. They watch. They wait. They strike when the prey feels safest. Dominic rolled toward his bedroom and pulled out the suit he saved for important meetings. Charcoal gray, tailored to fit perfectly even while seated. The Patek Philippe watch his father had given him 20 years ago, 3 months before a heart attack had taken him at 56. The watch had survived the helicopter crash without a scratch, still keeping perfect time while Dominic's legs had shattered. He dressed slowly, deliberately, turning preparation into meditation. By the time he finished, his hands were steady and his expression was calm. He looked like a man who'd made peace with his limitations. He looked like prey. The board meeting was predictable. Financials, product roadmaps, the awkward silence when someone mentioned the canceled Pentagon contract. Preston played his role perfectly supportive and concerned, asking gentle questions about Dominic's well-being while steering conversations toward delegation and sustainability. I think we all agree Dom's doing an incredible job under difficult circumstances, but maybe it's time to formalize some succession planning just to give the board peace of mind. Not because anything's wrong, but because strong companies plan for every contingency. 3 board members nodded. 2 looked uncomfortable. Dominic smiled and agreed that succession planning was prudent, professional, exactly the kind of forward thinking that separated good companies from great ones. Draw up a proposal, Preston. Let's discuss it next month. Preston's smile widened. Absolutely. I'll have something ready in 2 weeks. The meeting adjourned. Dominic stayed behind, ostensibly to review notes, really to watch Preston leave, to study the man's walk, his posture, the way he checked his phone the moment he thought no one was looking. Calculating, always calculating. When the office was empty, Dominic called Savannah Hartwell. Change of plans. We start tonight, my place, 7 p.m., and bring whatever equipment you need for a full evaluation. I want to know exactly what I'm working with. She didn't ask why. Just said, I'll be there, and hung up. Dominic spent the afternoon moving through his penthouse like he was seeing it for the first time. Every room, every corner, every space he'd adapted to accommodate the chair. The lowered countertops, the widened doorways, the roll-in shower. 2 years of accepting limitation, making it comfortable, turning prison into home. Tonight that ended. Savannah arrived at 6:50 carrying 2 duffel bags and wearing an expression that suggested she'd spent the day second-guessing her decision. She set the bags down in the entryway and looked at him. Before we start, I need to know something. Are you doing this because you want to walk again, or because you want to prove something to someone else? Does it matter? Yes, because one of those motivations will sustain you through 6 months of hell, and the other will break you in 6 weeks. Dominic rolled closer, near enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Someone tried to kill me and failed. Now they're trying to steal everything I built while I'm too broken to fight back. I'm doing this because I refuse to let them win. Good enough." Savannah picked up her bags and walked toward the gym. "We'll find out." The evaluation took 90 minutes. She tested everything: sensation, reflexes, muscle tone, range of motion, proprioception. She was thorough professional, occasionally brutal in her honesty. When she finished, she sat back on her heels and delivered the verdict. "You have incomplete injury at L1 to L2, just like I thought. You've got preserved sensation through most of your lower extremities and some voluntary motor function you've been ignoring for 2 years. The muscles have atrophied, but the neural pathways are viable. With intensive work, you could potentially regain functional mobility." "Potentially? I don't make promises I can't keep, Mr. Frost. But I can promise this: if you commit to the program I design, you'll be stronger in 6 months than you are now. Whether that means walking or just better function in the chair depends on factors we can't control. What we can control is effort." "When do we start?" "We already did. Tomorrow, 5 a.m. We'll do 3 hours of therapy, then you'll go to work, then we'll do another 2 hours in the evening. 6 days a week. Sundays off. For the next 6 months, I own your schedule." Dominic nodded. "Done. But I need one more thing from you. Let me guess. Discretion. Preston Blackwood can't know I'm working on recovery. As far as anyone at Frost Technologies is concerned, you're here to manage chronic pain and prevent further deterioration. Nothing more." Savannah stood brushing dust from her scrubs. "You really think your business partner tried to kill you?" "I think someone sabotaged my helicopter, and he's the only person who benefits from me being incapacitated. I think he's positioning himself to take over my company while I'm too weak to stop him. And I think if he knows I'm getting stronger, he'll try again." She studied him for a long moment, then she held out her hand. 6 months. Starting tomorrow. And Mr. Frost. If someone really is trying to hurt you, maybe getting stronger isn't enough. Maybe you need to get smarter too. He shook her hand, feeling the calluses that came from years of hard work. "I'm working on that part." She left at 9. Dominic sat alone in his gym, staring at the parallel bars that would become his battlefield. Tomorrow, the war would begin. Not just against his body's betrayal, but against the man who'd orchestrated it. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from Preston. "Dinner next week. Been too long since we caught up properly." Dominic typed back. "Sounds good. I'll have my assistant set something up." Then he deleted the message thread and opened a new file on his laptop. A detailed log of every interaction with Preston over the past 2 years. Every meeting, every decision, every moment when Preston had pushed just a little too hard for Dominic to step back to rest, to let others handle the weight of leadership. Every moment of a friendship that had died in a helicopter crash without either of them noticing. The city lights glittered beyond his window, a million lives unfolding in parallel, oblivious to the quiet war beginning in a penthouse above the harbor. Dominic rolled to his bedroom and transferred to the bed muscles already aching from Savannah's evaluation. Tomorrow would hurt worse. The day after, worse still. He closed his eyes and let himself imagine something he'd forbidden for 2 years. Not just standing, walking, running, chasing down the man who'd tried to bury him and making him answer for every stolen day, every lost possibility, every moment of pain that had led to this. The image carried him into sleep, and for the first time since the crash, Dominic Frost dreamed of falling upward. 5 a.m. came like a sentence being carried out. Savannah arrived with coffee she didn't offer to share, and a resistance band that looked designed for orthopedic torture. Dominic was already in the gym, having slept maybe 3 hours total. His body knew what was coming, even if his pride refused to acknowledge it. On the mat, face down. We're starting with proprioceptive training. For the next 40 minutes, she manipulated his legs through positions he couldn't feel and asked him to guess where his feet were pointing. North, south, flexed, extended. He got maybe 30% right. The rest was humiliating guesswork, his brain unable to communicate with limbs that had become foreign territory. Your neural pathways are like roads that haven't been maintained. We're going to rebuild them one repetition at a time. This isn't about strength yet. It's about teaching your nervous system to remember what it forgot. She moved him through exercises that seemed pointless, tiny movements, micro-adjustments, breathing techniques that were supposed to activate core muscles he couldn't sense. By 6:30, sweat was pouring down his face and his arms were shaking from supporting positions his legs should have managed automatically. Enough for today. Drink water, eat protein. I'll be back at 6 tonight. She left before he could respond. Dominic lay on the mat for 10 minutes, staring at the ceiling, wondering if 6 months would be enough to undo 2 years of atrophy and another lifetime of learning to function without hope. He showered, dressed, and made it to the office by 8. His assistant had already stacked the morning's priorities: 3 contract reviews, a conference call with West Coast investors, and a reminder about the dinner with Preston scheduled for next week. Dominic pushed through the work with mechanical efficiency, his mind only half present. The other half was cataloging every moment of weakness Preston might exploit, every sign that Dominic was still the same broken CEO who'd accepted his wheelchair as permanent. At 10, Jackson Cole called with an update that made Dominic's coffee taste like ash. I found Timothy Shaw's banking records. 3 days before your helicopter went down, he received a wire transfer for $50,000 from an account in the Cayman Islands. That account was funded by Blackwood Holdings, LLC, the same shell company that hired your maintenance contractor. Dominic's hand tightened around his phone. Can we trace it back to Preston directly? Not yet. The Cayman account was established with a Panamanian trust as the beneficial owner. Classic money laundering structure. But I've got a contact in Treasury who owes me a favor. Give me 3 weeks. You have 2. Jackson laughed, dark and knowing. You planning something stupid, Frost? I'm planning to stay alive long enough to watch him go to prison. He hung up and pulled up Preston's calendar through the company's shared system. Meetings with board members, lunch with the head of legal, dinner with investors Preston had cultivated independently over the past year, a pattern emerging like a photograph developing in solution. Preston wasn't just positioning himself to take over. He was building a coalition, securing votes, preparing for the moment when Dominic's position became untenable. The conference call at 11 was brutal. West Coast investors wanted assurances about leadership stability. Word had gotten out about the canceled Pentagon contract, about Dominic's aggressive stance on ethics compliance, about the tension in the boardroom. Preston was on the call, his voice smooth and reassuring, painting Dominic's decisions as noble but potentially risky. Dom's commitment to doing the right thing is exactly why we all invested in Frost Technologies. But we also need to balance idealism with market realities. I think what our investors are asking for is a clear succession plan that ensures continuity regardless of any individual's health situation. There it was again, health situation, as if paralysis was a cold that might get worse without proper rest. Dominic kept his voice level. Frost Technologies has always been built on one foundation: technology that serves humanity's best interests, not just our balance sheet. If that's changed, if we're now prioritizing profit over principle, then maybe I'm not the right CEO anymore. But I suspect that's not what our investors want to hear, because principle is what makes our valuation defensible. Anyone can build facial recognition software. We're the only company refusing to ship it until we know it won't destroy innocent lives. The call went quiet. Then one of the senior investors, a woman named Margaret Chen, who'd backed them in the seed round, spoke up. Dom's right. We invested in Frost because you two built something that mattered. If we're just chasing quarterly returns, we might as well sell to Facebook and cash out. I vote we table succession planning until there's an actual problem, not a hypothetical one. 3 other investors agreed. The call ended with Preston's voice still calm but carrying an edge Dominic had learned to recognize. Frustration. Barely contained. Lunch was a protein shake at his desk. At 2, Savannah texted, "Cancel your evening meeting, we're adding a 3rd session." He almost argued, then remembered her hand gripping his ankle that morning, asking him to point his toe, watching his face when he couldn't feel whether he was succeeding or failing. She wasn't being cruel, she was being honest. And honesty was the rarest commodity in his world right now. The afternoon crawled. At 5, he left the office and drove to a location Savannah had texted him. Not his penthouse. A private gym in South Boston, the kind of place that catered to athletes rehabbing from career-ending injuries. She met him in the parking lot. "Your home gym is fine for basics, but I need equipment you don't have. Parallel bars with force sensors, a treadmill with partial weight support, electrical stimulation units that cost more than most cars. This place has all of it." Inside the gym smelled like rubber and determination. Savannah introduced him to the owner, a former Patriots linebacker named Marcus Stone, who'd rebuilt his knee 3 times before retiring. Marcus looked at Dominic's chair without pity, just professional assessment. "Savannah says you're serious about this. Good. I don't rent to tourists. You work or you leave." For the next 90 minutes, Dominic discovered muscles he'd forgotten existed. The parallel bars became his nemesis. Savannah strapped him into a harness that supported 80% of his weight and demanded he try to bear the other 20. His legs trembled, collapsed, trembled again. She didn't let him stop. "Your quads are firing. I can see it. Your nervous system is trying to remember. Don't think about standing. Think about engaging the muscle. Just that one connection." By 7, his entire body was shaking. By 7:30, he'd managed to support his weight for 3 seconds before his knees gave out. By 8, Savannah finally called it. "Tomorrow we'll go for 5 seconds, then 8, then 10. In 6 months you'll wonder why 3 seconds ever seemed impossible." Dominic sat in his chair, drenched in sweat, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years. Not hope, exactly. Something harder, more dangerous. The willingness to fail repeatedly for the chance to succeed once. Marcus brought him water and a towel. "First session's always the worst. Your body doesn't believe you yet. Give it time." That night Dominic dreamed of standing. Not walking, not running, just standing upright with his own strength for longer than 3 seconds. In the dream, Preston was watching from across a boardroom, and the expression on his face was pure terror. He woke at 4 a.m. to his phone buzzing. A text from an unknown number. "You should stop pushing so hard. Accidents happen to people who don't know when to quit." Dominic stared at the message, screenshot it, forwarded it to Jackson Cole with a single word, "trace." Jackson's response came 30 seconds later. "Burner phone, untraceable. But that's a threat, Frost. File a police report." Dominic deleted the message instead. Filing a report meant making this official, creating a paper trail that would alert Preston he was being investigated. Better to stay quiet. Better to let Preston think his warning had landed. But Dominic added a new protocol to his security system. Motion sensors on every entrance, cameras with cloud backup, and a Glock 19 in the nightstand drawer legally registered, zeroed at the range 2 months ago by a friend who'd insisted that paralysis didn't mean defenseless. Savannah arrived at 5 with her usual coffee and lack of sympathy. They worked through the same proprioceptive drills, and this time Dominic got 40% right instead of 30. Progress measured in fractions that felt like miles. At the office, he reviewed the succession planning proposal Preston had promised to deliver in 2 weeks. It arrived early at 10 a.m., a beautifully formatted document that laid out clear chains of command contingency protocols and a process for temporary CEO transition in case of medical emergency or incapacity. The language was careful, professional, deadly, because the definition of incapacity included inability to perform essential job functions as determined by a majority vote of the board of directors, which meant if Preston could convince 8 of the 15 board members that Dominic's wheelchair made him unfit for leadership, he could trigger a transition without Dominic's consent. It was a coup disguised as corporate governance. Dominic called an emergency meeting with the 3 board members he trusted absolutely. Margaret Chen from the investor call, David Santos, who'd been his engineering professor at MIT, and Linda Kowalski, who ran HR with the kind of integrity that made her impossible to corrupt. They met at a restaurant in Cambridge, far from Frost Technologies' headquarters, at a table in the back where conversations stayed private. Margaret got straight to the point. "Preston's trying to force you out," David nodded. "I've been watching him work the board for months. Quiet conversations, lunches with members who are on the fence about your leadership style. He's building a coalition." Linda pulled out her tablet and showed Dominic a spreadsheet. I've been tracking board sentiment. Right now you've got 8 solid votes. Preston has 5. 2 are undecided. If he flips both swing votes, he can trigger the incapacity clause. Dominic studied the spreadsheet. The swing votes were both newer members recruited in the past year to bring expertise in AI regulation and international markets. Both had been Preston's recommendations. How long before he makes his move? Margaret tapped her wineglass. I'd guess 3 months, maybe 4. He needs time to convince the swing votes that you're not just disabled but actually incompetent, which means he'll start creating situations where you look weak or indecisive. He already tried that with the Pentagon contract. Didn't work. David leaned forward. Because Margaret shut it down. But he only needs to succeed once. One board meeting where you seem disengaged or unable to handle pressure, and the narrative shifts. Linda closed her tablet. You need leverage. Something that makes removing you more costly than keeping you. Preferably something that exposes Preston's agenda before he can execute it. Dominic considered telling them about Jackson's investigation, about the shell company and the Cayman account and the wire transfer to a dead man. But evidence that couldn't hold up in court was just speculation. And speculation could make him look paranoid, which would play directly into Preston's hands. Instead, he told them about Savannah, about the therapy sessions, about the possibility of regaining mobility. Margaret's eyes widened. If you could walk into a board meeting 6 months from now, Preston's whole argument collapses. That's a long shot. Savannah's good, but she's not selling miracles. David smiled. You don't need to walk. You just need to improve visibly enough that incapacity becomes laughable. Better mobility, more stamina. Anything that shows you're getting stronger, not weaker. Linda nodded. And we keep Preston distracted. Feed him small victories so he doesn't realize you're building towards something bigger. Let him think he's winning until the moment he's already lost. They spent another hour strategizing. Which board members to cultivate. Which narratives to counter. How to position Dominic's ethics stance as visionary instead of impractical. By the time dinner ended, Dominic had a plan that felt less like surrender and more like war. He drove to the South Boston gym for his evening session. Savannah was waiting with a new torture device electrodes that stimulated his leg muscles artificially while she guided him through movement patterns. Your nervous system needs to relearn the sequence. Contract the quad, stabilize the knee, engage the glute. Right now your brain is sending signals, but they're getting lost in translation. The electrical stimulation forces the muscles to respond, and eventually your brain remembers how to do it without help. For 45 minutes, his legs moved through walking motions while Dominic concentrated on feeling anything at all. Occasionally, a spark of sensation broke through, his calf contracting, his hamstring engaging, fragments of connection that disappeared as quickly as they came. Savannah watched his face. You felt that last one, I can tell. For about half a second. Half a second is a start. Tomorrow we'll go for a full second. Then 2. Your nervous system is waking up, Dominic. Don't rush it. After the session, she sat down across from him with unusual seriousness. I need to know something. Is the person threatening you the same person you think sabotaged your helicopter? He should have been surprised she knew. He wasn't. Savannah missed nothing. Probably. Why? Because if someone tried to kill you once, they might try again. And if they see you getting stronger, that threat increases. I need to know if I'm walking into a situation that's more dangerous than standard physical therapy malpractice. Dominic met her eyes. I won't let anyone hurt you because of me. That's not what I asked. Yes, it's the same person. And yes, it's getting more dangerous. If you want to walk away, I'll pay you the full 6 months and we'll call it even. Savannah stood slinging her bag over her shoulder. I don't walk away from patients who are making progress, but I need you to promise me something. What? When this gets bad, and it will, you trust me enough to tell me the truth. All of it. I can't help you if I'm working blind. He nodded. She left without another word. That night, Dominic received an email from Preston with the subject line, Dinner tomorrow. The message was cheerful, casual, suggesting a steakhouse in the financial district. Old times. Just 2 friends catching up. Dominic replied, looking forward to it. Then he called Jackson Cole. I need surveillance equipment, small enough to hide, good enough to record clearly in a loud restaurant. Jackson didn't ask why. I'll have it to you by tomorrow afternoon. The device arrived at 3 p.m. A pen that looked completely ordinary, but contained a microphone and transmitter sophisticated enough to pick up conversations in a crowded room. Jackson had included instructions written in his economical style. Click twice to start recording. Click 3 times to stop. Battery lasts 6 hours. Don't lose this. It cost more than your car. Dominic practiced in his office until the motion became muscle memory. Click, 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 click. At 7, he met Preston at the steakhouse. His former friend was already seated, 2 glasses of bourbon waiting on the table. Preston stood when Dominic approached, and for a moment the smile looked genuine. Then Dominic remembered the wire transfer, the shell company, the helicopter falling from the sky. It's been too long, Dom. I feel like we never talk anymore outside of board meetings. They settled into conversation that felt like sparring disguised as friendship. Preston asked about recovery, about therapy, about whether Dominic had considered taking time off to focus on his health. Dominic answered vaguely, steering discussion toward company business, watching Preston's face for tells. Halfway through dinner, Preston shifted gears. I've been thinking about the succession plan. I know you pushed back, but I really believe it's necessary. Not because I doubt you, but because the board needs reassurance. And honestly, Dom, you deserve the option to step back if this gets too hard. Dominic cut into his steak. What gets too hard? Running the company or sitting in this chair? Both. Neither. I just mean you've been carrying this weight alone for 2 years. Let me help. Let the executive team help. You built something incredible. Don't burn yourself out trying to prove you can do it all solo. The concern sounded real. The words sounded caring. And maybe in some alternate universe they were. But in this one they were camouflage for ambition, sharp enough to cut through titanium rotor blades. Dominic leaned back, letting his voice carry the exhaustion he actually felt. You're probably right. I have been pushing too hard. Maybe it is time to delegate more. Preston's expression brightened. Really? Because I was thinking we could start transitioning some CEO responsibilities to an executive committee structure. You'd still have final say, but the day-to-day operations would distribute across the senior team. Draw up a proposal. Let's review it next month. They finished dinner talking about market trends and product roadmaps. Preston picked up the check, and they parted with a handshake that made Dominic's skin crawl. He drove home in silence, the recording device heavy in his pocket. At the penthouse, he uploaded the audio to his laptop and listened 3 times. Preston's voice, warm and persuasive, painting a picture of graceful decline. Dominic stepping back. Preston stepping up. A transition so smooth the board wouldn't even notice until it was complete. But nothing incriminating. Nothing that proved sabotage or conspiracy. Just one friend advising another to take care of himself. Dominic sent the file to Jackson anyway with a note. He's moving faster than we thought. How much longer? Jackson's response came at midnight. Found something. Not enough to prosecute, but enough to know we're right. Shaw's Cayman account received funding from 3 sources before your crash. All 3 trace back to Preston through different shell companies. He didn't just sabotage your helicopter. He'd been planning it for at least 6 months. Dominic read the message twice. Then he walked to his window and stared out at Boston's sleeping skyline. 6 months of planning, half a year of watching his supposed friend smile and scheme and wait for the right moment to end his life. The fury that rose up was cold, surgical. It didn't demand immediate action. It demanded perfect patience. His phone buzzed. Savannah. Can't sleep either. Meet me at the gym in 20 minutes? I have an idea. He found her in the empty facility, lights on, equipment ready. She'd set up the parallel bars with cameras positioned to capture his movements from multiple angles. I want to document your progress, not for anyone else, for you. So on the days when 3 seconds feels impossible, you can watch yourself do it and remember you're not imagining the improvement. For the next hour, they worked in focused silence. 3 seconds became 4, then 5. On his 8th attempt, Dominic held his weight for 7 seconds before his legs gave out. Savannah filmed it all, her face impassive, professional. When they finished, she showed him the footage, his legs trembling, his core engaged, his jaw set with concentration that bordered on rage, and for 7 seconds standing upright without the chair, not walking, not even shifting weight, but vertical, independent, human. Tomorrow we'll go for 10, then 15. In 2 months you'll hold it for a minute. In 4 months you might take a step. Dominic watched the video again. What made you think of documenting this? Savannah packed her equipment. Because memory is unreliable. Progress feels invisible when you're living it day by day, but evidence doesn't lie. And when someone tries to tell you you're not getting stronger, you'll have proof they're wrong. She understood, without him explaining, without him spelling out that Preston was building a narrative of decline while Dominic was actually ascending. Thank you. She paused at the door. Don't thank me yet. We're only 2 weeks in. The real work comes when your body starts screaming at you to quit and your mind agrees. That's when we'll find out if you're actually serious or just stubborn. Over the next month, Dominic lived a double life. At the office, he played the weary CEO considering delegation. In board meetings, he let Preston take more speaking time, let him field questions, let him slowly assume the visible trappings of leadership. The swing voters started looking to Preston for reassurance instead of Dominic. Margaret sent worried texts. David called to ask if Dominic was giving up. He wasn't giving up. He was baiting a trap. Because while Preston gathered power in boardrooms, Dominic was gathering strength in a South Boston gym. 7 seconds became 15. 15 became 30. By week 6, he could stand for 45 seconds, and Savannah had introduced a new challenge, shifting weight from one leg to the other. The first time he managed it, taking pressure off his right leg and putting it on his left for 3 seconds before collapsing, Savannah actually smiled. That's walking Dominic. Controlled falling from one leg to the other. You just did it for 3 seconds. In another month, you'll do it for 30. Jackson's investigation advanced in parallel. The Cayman account had funded the shell company that hired Timothy Shaw. Shaw had hired the maintenance contractor who'd sabotaged the helicopter, and Preston had transferred $200,000 into the Cayman account the week before the crash. Not enough for criminal prosecution without Shaw's testimony, and Shaw was conveniently dead. But enough to destroy Preston in civil court. Enough to ruin him professionally. Enough to make sure he never worked in technology again. But Dominic wanted more than professional destruction. He wanted justice, which meant criminal charges, which meant finding evidence that would hold up beyond reasonable doubt. On week 8, Preston made his move. An emergency board meeting called with 72 hours' notice. The agenda, CEO succession planning and leadership transition timeline. Dominic attended remotely, his video feed showing him in his home office looking tired. Margaret and David tried to slow the discussion, but Preston had done his homework. He presented a detailed analysis of company performance under stress, highlighting canceled contracts and delayed product launches. None of it was inaccurate. All of it painted Dominic as a liability. Then Preston played his trump card, a letter from the company's insurance carrier expressing concern about leadership continuity given the CEO's ongoing medical situation. The letter recommended formal succession planning to protect the company's insurability. It was brilliant, legal, defensible, and nearly impossible to counter without looking paranoid. The swing votes shifted. One openly agreed with Preston's proposal. The other looked uncomfortable but didn't object. Margaret called for a vote delay, citing the need for independent legal review. The motion passed narrowly, buying Dominic 2 weeks. After the meeting, Linda sent a private message, "We're losing them. Whatever you're planning, it needs to happen soon." That night, Dominic stood in the parallel bars for 90 seconds straight. Then he took 3 weight-bearing steps, his legs shaking but functional, before Savannah had to catch him. She filmed the whole thing, her hands steady on the camera. "In 2 weeks, you'll do 6 steps, maybe 8 if we push hard." Dominic looked at the video, looked at his legs moving through space with his own power. Looked at the man in the footage who resembled the person he'd been before the crash, but carried something harder in his eyes. "I need to walk into that next board meeting. Actually walk. Not with a harness, not with support. Just walk from the door to my chair under my own power. Can we do that in 2 weeks?" Savannah set down the camera. Maybe. If we double the sessions and you accept that it's going to break you first. Your body isn't ready for that kind of intensity. You'll be in constant pain. You might injure yourself and lose the progress we've made. It's a terrible idea from a medical standpoint. But can we do it? She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. We can try. The next 2 weeks were systematic destruction. 3 sessions a day, 4 hours each. Dominic stopped going to the office, told his assistant he was dealing with a medical situation and would work remotely until the board meeting. Preston sent concerned emails that Dominic answered vaguely, maintaining the narrative of a CEO overwhelmed by his limitations. In reality, he was learning to walk. Savannah pushed him past every threshold he thought existed. The parallel bars became his universe. 3 steps became 6. 6 became 10. His legs screamed. His back seized. Twice he fell hard enough to bruise ribs. Savannah never let him quit. Pain is information. Your body is relearning skills it forgot. Listen to the information, but don't obey it. There's a difference between can't and shouldn't, and right now we're operating in the shouldn't category because we don't have time for smart choices. On day 10, he walked 15 steps. On day 12, 20. On day 13, he made it across the gym floor 37 steps before his legs gave out. Savannah caught him and eased him into the wheelchair, her face showing something between pride and concern. You're ready. Barely, but ready. Just don't try to run. Your nervous system hasn't rebuilt that much capacity. The morning of the board meeting, Dominic dressed in his best suit. He transferred to his wheelchair and let his assistant wheel him into Frost Technologies headquarters. Preston was waiting in the lobby, concern radiating like cologne. Dom, are you sure you're up for this? We can postpone if you need more time. Dominic smiled. I'm exactly where I need to be. The boardroom filled by 9, all 15 members present. Margaret and David positioned strategically near the door. Preston at his usual seat, looking confident and calm. The succession planning document projected on the main screen, polished and professional and devastating. Preston opened with practiced sympathy. I know this is difficult, but I want to be clear that this isn't about Dominic's ability or his vision. It's about sustainability, about making sure Frost Technologies can weather any storm, medical or otherwise. He spoke for 20 minutes, cited insurance concerns, market pressures, fiduciary duty to shareholders. By the time he finished, 3 more board members were nodding along. Margaret's jaw was clenched so tight Dominic thought she might crack a tooth. Then Dominic raised his hand. I'd like to address the board if I may. Preston gestured magnanimously. Of course. Dominic wheeled himself to the front of the room, positioned his chair carefully. Then he locked the wheels and gripped the armrests. 2 years ago, someone sabotaged my helicopter. They cut through the rotor mount with precision, weakened it just enough to fail mid-flight, and then covered their tracks through shell companies and dead contractors. The NTSB called it mechanical failure, but it was attempted murder. The room went silent. Preston's face remained neutral, but his pupils constricted. Dominic continued. I spent 2 years accepting that I'd never walk again, accepting that whoever tried to kill me had succeeded in destroying the life I'd built. But something happened 8 weeks ago. I stopped accepting and started fighting. He pushed himself upright. His legs trembled but held. The board members stared. Preston's face went white. I hired a physical therapist who taught me that paralysis isn't always permanent, that neural pathways can rebuild. That strength returns to those who refuse to quit. Dominic took his first step, then his second. His legs shook violently but carried him forward. 3rd step, 4th, 5th. I also hired an investigator who followed the money from my sabotaged helicopter to a shell company called Blackwood Holdings, LLC, who traced wire transfers from the Cayman Islands to a dead contractor named Timothy Shaw, who discovered that someone in this room spent 6 months planning my murder and another 2 years trying to steal my company while I recovered. 6th step. 7th. He was halfway across the room now, every eye locked on his impossible progress. Preston, I'm giving you one chance, Resign today, return your shares, and disappear. Or I press charges and you spend the next 20 years in a federal prison explaining to your cellmate why you tried to kill your best friend." Preston stood slowly. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket. Linda shouted a warning. Two security guards Dominic had positioned outside burst through the door. Preston's hand emerged holding not a weapon but his phone. He smiled cold and final. "You can't prove any of this, Dom. Shell companies aren't illegal. Wire transfers aren't evidence. And walking across a room doesn't change the fact that you're damaged goods." Dominic took 2 more steps. 9 total. 10. He was standing directly in front of Preston now, looking down at the man who'd tried to erase him from existence. "You're right. I can't prove it criminally. Not yet. But civil court has a lower burden of proof and wrongful death suits can bankrupt even billionaires. More importantly, every person in this room just watched you stay silent instead of denying it. They know. And that's enough." Preston's smile cracked. He looked around the boardroom at faces that had turned from neutral to horrified. Margaret was already on her phone, presumably calling the company's legal counsel. David had his tablet out, likely documenting everything being said. Preston's voice dropped to a whisper only Dominic could hear. "You were supposed to die in that helicopter. Everything since then has been borrowed time." Dominic's 11th step brought him close enough to smell Preston's fear. "Then I guess I'm making the most of it." Preston shoved past him toward the door. The security guards blocked his path. He spun back, and for the first time in 14 years of friendship, Dominic saw the real person behind the mask. Not a partner, not a friend, just a man who'd decided that $8 billion was worth a life. Preston's hand dropped to his side. When it came back up, there was a Glock in it. The room exploded into motion. Savannah, who'd been watching from the doorway, threw herself forward, the gun discharged. She crumpled, blood spreading across her shoulder. Dominic's 12th step was a lunge. His 13th was a tackle that drove both men to the floor. Preston's head hit the mahogany with a crack that echoed. The gun skittered away. Security descended. Dominic knelt over Preston, his legs supporting his weight through sheer fury. "Did you really think I'd let you win?" Preston's eyes were unfocused blood trickling from where his skull had impacted. He smiled through broken teeth. "You're still in a chair, Dom. I already won." Dominic stood, walked 3 more steps to where Savannah lay bleeding. 16 steps total, more than he'd planned, more than his body was ready for. But enough. He collapsed beside her as sirens wailed in the distance, his legs finally surrendering to tremors he could no longer control. Savannah's eyes were open clear despite the pain. "You walked. You got shot. I've had worse." She pressed her hand to the wound, her face going pale. "How many steps?" 16. She smiled. "We were aiming for 12. Overachiever." The paramedics arrived. The police. The chaos of aftermath. Dominic stayed beside Savannah until they loaded her into an ambulance, then let the same paramedics check him over. No injuries from the tackle, just muscle strain from walking farther than his nervous system had relearned to handle. Preston was arrested, charged with attempted murder assault with a deadly weapon and a list of corporate crimes that would take months to prosecute. The evidence Jackson had gathered, combined with Preston's own words in the boardroom, would be enough. More than enough. That night, Dominic sat in his wheelchair in the hospital waiting room while surgeons extracted a 9mm bullet from Savannah's shoulder. Margaret and David arrived with updates. The board had voted unanimously to remove Preston and begin criminal proceedings. The swing voters who'd been ready to support succession planning were now mortified they'd almost handed the company to someone who'd tried to murder its founder. At midnight, a surgeon emerged to report that Savannah would make a full recovery. The bullet had missed major arteries. She'd need physical therapy herself, which she'd apparently found hilarious under anesthesia. Dominic was allowed to see her at 1 a.m. She was awake, groggy, her shoulder bandaged and her arm in a sling. 16 steps. I saw the footage. Someone recorded it on their phone and it's already going viral. You saved my life. She shook her head. You saved your own life 2 years ago when you survived a helicopter crash someone engineered. I just taught you to stand up afterward. He took her uninjured hand. When you're recovered, I want to hire you permanently, not as a therapist, as VP of Human Performance. Build a program that helps other people with spinal cord injuries find what we found. Savannah squeezed his hand. Only if you promise to keep working on your recovery. 16 steps is impressive, but you're not done yet. How many steps until I'm done? She smiled through the painkillers. There is no finish line, Dominic. Just the next step, and the one after that, and all the ones that follow for the rest of your life. He stayed until she fell asleep, then wheeled himself to the elevator and down to the parking garage. His legs were finished for the day, maybe for the week, but they'd carried him when it mattered. They'd walked him through fire toward the man who'd tried to burn him alive. Tomorrow he'd walk again, the day after, farther still. Because Savannah was right. There was no finish line, just motion forward, one impossible step at a time until the impossible became routine and routine became triumph. His phone buzzed. A text from Jackson Cole. Saw the news. Hell of a performance. Shaw's widow just came forward with documents her husband kept as insurance, phone records, emails. Preston's finished. Dominic typed back, "Send everything to the FBI. I want this airtight." Then he drove himself home, transferred to bed, and slept without dreaming of falling for the first time in 2 years. The federal courthouse in Boston smelled like old wood and newer anxiety. 21 days after Preston Blackwood's arrest, Dominic sat in the gallery watching his former friend's arraignment, his wheelchair positioned where Preston would have to see him when the marshals brought him in. The courtroom filled with journalists, Frost Technologies employees and investors who'd believed Preston's concerned facade right up until he'd pulled a gun in a boardroom. Preston entered in orange scrubs, wrists cuffed face showing none of the charm that had masked 2 years of calculated murder. His eyes found Dominic immediately. No remorse there. Just cold arithmetic still calculating whether there was an angle left to play. The judge read charges that would take Preston's next quarter century if the prosecution could make them stick. Attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, corporate espionage. The public defender entered a not guilty plea that surprised no one. Bail was denied. Preston would await trial in federal detention, and Dominic felt something settle in his chest that wasn't quite satisfaction. More like the first full breath after drowning. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Dominic had prepared a statement with legal 3 sentences that conveyed gratitude for law enforcement and confidence in the justice system without saying anything that could jeopardize prosecution. He delivered it from his wheelchair, letting the contrast speak louder than words. The man in the chair was free. The man who'd put him there was caged. Margaret Chen waited by his car, her expression carrying the weight of someone who'd almost made a catastrophic mistake. I should have seen it. Should have questioned why Preston was pushing succession planning so hard. He fooled everyone. That was the point. She handed him a folder. The board met this morning. Unanimously voted to restructure executive compensation, claw back Preston's unvested stock, and establish an independent ethics committee with real authority. We're also funding a program for employees with disabilities, full accessibility, retrofitting across all offices, adaptive technology mentorship initiatives. If you'd died in that helicopter, none of this would exist. So maybe some good comes from survival. Dominic took the folder without opening it. I'm not a symbol, Margaret. I'm just someone who got lucky twice. Luck is staying alive. What you did afterward was choice. Don't diminish that. He drove to the hospital where Savannah was finishing her second day of recovery. The bullet wound was clean healing faster than the doctors had projected, but she'd developed an infection that kept her on IV antibiotics. He found her sitting up in bed one-handed, scrolling through her tablet, while her mother, Grace Hartwell, fussed with flower arrangements that had overtaken the room. Grace looked up when Dominic entered. She had Savannah's green eyes and the same refusal to accept defeat written into the lines around her mouth. 2 nursing shifts per day for years had left her hands scarred from constant sanitizer use, but she moved with the efficiency of someone who'd learned not to waste motion. "Mr. Frost, Savannah mentioned you might visit. I wanted to check on her progress. and to thank you for raising someone stubborn enough to throw herself in front of a bullet." Grace's smile was tired but genuine. "Stubborn runs in our family. My father served 30 years in the Navy and still reports for duty every morning, even though Parkinson's stole his balance." Savannah learned early that giving up isn't an option. Savannah waved her mother toward the door. "Mom, can you give us a minute? I need to discuss therapy protocols with Mr. Frost." Grace left with a knowing look that suggested therapy protocols was transparent code for private conversation. Savannah waited until the door closed. "You walked 16 steps and then didn't walk for 3 days. Jackson's been sending me videos of you in the wheelchair looking exhausted. Please tell me you're not destroying the progress we made." "My legs needed recovery time. Savannah, you took a bullet meant for me. I think I'm allowed to be cautious." She shifted in bed, wincing as the movement pulled at her shoulder. "Cautious is fine. Regressing isn't. As soon as I'm released, we're resuming sessions. And this time we're building sustainable strength, not just theatrical demonstrations. You're fired from being my therapist." Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me. Because I'm hiring you as VP of Human Performance effective immediately. Salary, equity, full benefits. Your first project is designing a comprehensive program for employees with spinal cord injuries and other mobility challenges. Your second project is making sure I don't backslide. But you're not doing it as my employee anymore. You're doing it as my partner." Savannah was quiet for a moment. Then she held out her uninjured hand. "Deal. But I'm keeping the therapy sessions. VP doesn't mean you get to skip work." They shook on it, and Dominic felt something shift. Not romance, though he'd be lying if he claimed he hadn't thought about it. Something deeper. The recognition that they'd both been trying to prove something, both fighting demons that wore different faces, and somehow they'd ended up fighting side by side instead of alone. The investigation expanded over the following weeks. Shaw's widow had kept meticulous records, terrified her husband's death hadn't been accidental. Bank statements showing the wire transfers. Emails between Preston and Shaw discussing helicopter maintenance schedules. A recorded phone call where Preston had specified which components to weaken without triggering immediate failure. The kind of evidence that turned attempted murder into premeditated conspiracy. Jackson delivered his final report on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks after the boardroom shooting. 300 pages of documentation that would bury Preston under a prison he'd never escape. They met at Dominic's penthouse, spreading files across the dining table like battle plans. Shaw's widow is willing to testify. Preston's college roommate before he died told his wife about the shell companies. She's willing to testify too. The Cayman banker who processed the transfers just got immunity in exchange for cooperation. The prosecution has 12 witnesses, 47 pieces of physical evidence, and a defendant who pulled a gun in front of 15 board members. This isn't a trial. It's a formality before sentencing. Dominic studied this timeline Jackson had constructed. 6 months of planning before the helicopter crash. Multiple contingency plans if the sabotage failed. A backup strategy to force Dominic out through board action if he survived. Preston hadn't just tried to kill him once. He'd built an entire architecture of destruction, patient and thorough, willing to wait years for the right moment. How long before the trial? 8 months minimum. Federal cases move slow, and Preston's lawyers will delay everything they can. But they can't delay the inevitable. He's going down Frost. The only question is whether he gets 25 years or life. Jackson left the files and disappeared back into whatever shadows former FBI agents inhabited between cases. Dominic sat alone with the evidence of betrayal, reading emails from a friend who'd smiled while planning his murder and felt nothing. No anger, no grief. Just the cold recognition that Preston had been a stranger wearing a familiar face for far longer than Dominic had known. He called his mother that evening. Catherine Frost answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who'd chosen joy despite losing her husband young and raising a son who'd inherited his father's stubborn refusal to accept limitations. "I saw the news. Are you all right?" "I'm better than I've been in 2 years." "That's not what I asked." Dominic leaned back in his chair, staring at the Boston skyline. "Preston tried to kill me, Mom. Someone I trusted completely. Someone I built a company with. And I didn't see it until he was standing in front of me with a gun." Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then her voice came back steady, carrying the same strength that had gotten her through widowhood and Dominic's recovery and every other crisis that had tried to break their small family. Your father used to say that trust isn't weakness, it's courage. We give it knowing it might be betrayed because the alternative is living in a cage we built ourselves. Preston's betrayal doesn't mean you were wrong to trust. It means he was wrong to accept that trust and weaponize it. I should have seen the signs. Maybe. Or maybe some people are just very good at hiding who they are. Don't blame yourself for someone else's choice to be a monster. They talked for another hour about nothing important. Denver weather, the garden she was planning, whether Dominic was eating enough vegetables. The conversation felt like anchoring after months of floating, and when he finally hung up, the penthouse felt less empty. Savannah was released from the hospital 5 days later. Dominic sent a car to bring her home, and she immediately texted, "I don't need a chauffeur. I have 1 functional arm and 2 working legs." He replied, "Humor me. Consider it a signing bonus for the VP position." She showed up at his penthouse that evening with her duffel bags and a determination that suggested the bullet wound had only made her more committed to the work. They spent 2 hours in his gym rebuilding the foundation that theatrical boardroom walking had undermined. Back to basics. Proprioceptive training, controlled weight shifts, the parallel bars becoming a classroom instead of a performance stage. You pushed too hard too fast because you needed a victory. I understand that. But now we're past the crisis and real recovery is about consistency, not heroics. 3 steps every day is better than 16 steps once if the 16 steps damage your nervous system's ability to rebuild. She was right. The weeks that followed proved it. 3 steps became 5, 5 became 10. But this time the progress was sustainable, built on neurological pathways that were strengthening instead of being shocked into temporary function. By the 12th week after the shooting, Dominic could walk from his bedroom to his kitchen without assistance roughly 40 steps that took 5 minutes, but didn't leave him unable to repeat them the next day. The company stabilized under new leadership structures. With Preston gone, Dominic promoted from within, elevating people who'd proven their competence through years of work instead of political maneuvering. The VP of Engineering became COO. The head of ethics became Chief Strategy Officer. And Savannah built a human performance division that became a model for corporate accessibility programs nationwide. They worked together in ways that surprised both of them. Savannah understood systems thinking from her medical training. Dominic understood organizational design from building Frost Technologies. Combined, they created something neither could have achieved alone: a comprehensive framework for integrating employees with disabilities, not as charity cases, but as valued contributors, whose different perspectives made the company stronger. 4 months after the boardroom shooting, Savannah's program launched officially. 15 employees with various mobility challenges were recruited specifically for their expertise, given full accessibility support, and integrated into teams across the company. The initiative got press coverage that positioned Frost Technologies as an industry leader in inclusive employment. But the real victory was smaller. Watching a software engineer with cerebral palsy present code review findings to a team that valued his insight more than his gait. Dominic attended the program launch in his wheelchair. He could walk now, could manage 100 steps on good days, but the chair was still part of his reality, and he'd stopped being ashamed of it. Savannah had taught him what took most people years to learn. Mobility wasn't binary, and using assistive devices wasn't failure, just pragmatic recognition that energy was finite and worth conserving for battles that mattered. 6 months after Preston's arrest, the trial began. The prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision: 13 witnesses, 62 pieces of evidence, a timeline that showed premeditation stretching back 9 months before the helicopter crash. Preston's defense attorney tried to paint him as a concerned friend whose mental health had deteriorated under the pressure of running a billion-dollar company. The jury wasn't buying it. Dominic testified on day 8. The prosecution walked him through the relationship history, the company's growth the moment he'd refused to sell to Chinese investors, and Preston's reaction. Then they showed the jury footage of Preston pulling a gun in the boardroom, showed Savannah taking the bullet, showed Dominic tackling Preston despite having relearned to walk only weeks earlier. The defense attorney cross-examined aggressively, trying to establish that Dominic's physical recovery proved he'd exaggerated his injuries to gain sympathy. Savannah, testifying the next day, destroyed that narrative with medical precision. She explained incomplete spinal cord injury, neuroplasticity, the difference between spinal shock and permanent paralysis. She showed the jury videos of Dominic's therapy progression, the trembling legs, the countless failures before each small success. Recovery isn't a switch you flip. It's a process measured in millimeters of progress over months of work. Mr. Frost didn't exaggerate his injuries. He simply refused to accept them as permanent. There's a difference. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Preston's face showed nothing as the judge read each verdict, but his hands gripped the defense table hard enough to whiten his knuckles. Sentencing was scheduled for 8 weeks later, but everyone knew the outcome. Federal sentencing guidelines left little room for mercy in attempted murder cases where the evidence was this overwhelming. That night, Dominic and Savannah had dinner at a restaurant in Cambridge, far from the courthouse and the press coverage and the weight of watching a former friend get dismantled by justice. They sat outside despite October's chill, both needing air and space and the reminder that life continued past courtrooms. Savannah had regained full range of motion in her shoulder, though she still favored it unconsciously when tired. Her hair was shorter now, cut in a practical style that required less maintenance than the bun she'd worn when they met. She'd been offered speaking engagements, consulting contracts, media interviews about her role in stopping Preston. She'd turned them all down in favor of building something that mattered more than personal fame. The program's working. We've had 43 applications for the next cohort. Companies are calling asking how to replicate our model. I think we might actually change how corporate America thinks about disability employment. Dominic smiled. You sound surprised. I am. Most initiatives like this are performative, window dressing to check diversity boxes. But you actually meant it when you said you wanted to build something real. I had a good teacher. She shook her head. You had motivation. I just showed you the exercises. The work was always yours. They finished dinner as stars emerged over Cambridge, rare and bright, in a sky usually too light-polluted to reveal them. Dominic drove them back to his penthouse, the route now so familiar, his hands managed the controls without conscious thought. Savannah had started keeping a change of clothes in his guest room, professional boundaries blurring into something that resembled friendship but carried undercurrents neither of them had named. Inside, she poured 2 glasses of wine while Dominic transferred from wheelchair to sofa. His evening routine had evolved. Some nights he stayed in the chair. Some nights he walked the penthouse building's strength through mundane tasks like carrying dishes to the sink or retrieving books from shelves. Tonight felt like a walking night, so he stood and made his way to the window, 43 steps that would have been impossible 8 months ago. Savannah joined him with the wine. I've been thinking about something. Dangerous habit. Serious. When the trial ends and Preston's sentenced, what's next for you, not for the company, for you personally? Dominic considered the question. What came after revenge? After justice? After proving that attempted murder could fail so completely, the victim ended up stronger than before? I don't know. I spent 2 years focused on survival, then 8 months focused on walking and putting Preston in prison. Maybe it's time to figure out what I actually want instead of just responding to what's been taken. Savannah nodded. That's healthy, also terrifying. Most people never ask themselves that question because answering it requires admitting that what we want might not be what we have. What do you want? She turned to face him, green eyes catching the city lights. I want to build something that outlasts both of us. A model that proves disability doesn't diminish value. It just changes the shape of contribution. I want to publish research that shifts how medical professionals think about spinal cord injury recovery. And I want to stop pretending I'm here purely as your VP instead of someone who actually cares whether you're happy. The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable, in a way that made Dominic's chest tighten. He set down his wine glass carefully. I care whether you're happy too. Probably more than is professionally appropriate. Good. Because I'm about to do something wildly unprofessional. She kissed him, not tentatively, not as a question. As a statement of fact, direct and certain, the same way she approached everything else. Dominic responded instinctively, his hands finding her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened, months of unspoken tension finally finding release. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Savannah smiled. "I've wanted to do that since you walked 16 steps just to prove Preston wrong. I've wanted you to do that since you told me fear was my real prison and I needed to stop giving my enemies second chances." They kissed again, slower this time, exploring the transition from professional partnership to something that felt inevitable in retrospect. Eventually they migrated to the sofa, Savannah fitting herself against Dominic's side, while he tried to remember the last time he'd felt this settled, this right. "We should probably discuss boundaries, work-life separation, how to make sure this doesn't compromise the program we're building." Dominic laughed. "You just kissed me, and now you want to negotiate protocols. I'm practical, sue me. I'd rather employ you, which I already do, which means you're right, we need boundaries." They talked until midnight, establishing rules that felt reasonable. Professional behavior at work, no displays of affection in front of employees, separate hotel rooms when traveling for business, full transparency with HR to avoid any appearance of impropriety. By the time they finished, Savannah was yawning against his shoulder. "I should go home. Early session tomorrow with one of the new program participants." "Or you could stay. Guest room. No pressure. Just so you don't have to drive tired." She considered, then nodded. "Guest room. And Dominic, thank you for not making this complicated. Thank you for making it possible." Preston's sentencing hearing happened on a gray November morning 10 months after the boardroom shooting. The judge heard victim impact statements from Dominic, from Savannah, from employees whose careers had been jeopardized by Preston's sabotage. Then she delivered a sentence that matched the severity of the crimes: 28 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole before serving 85% of the term. Preston would be 70 when he was released if he lived that long. His fortune, already decimated by legal fees and asset seizure, would be nothing by then. The man who'd tried to steal an empire would die in a cage, having lost everything, including the ability to harm anyone ever again. Dominic felt no triumph watching marshals lead Preston away. Just closure, the kind that came from knowing justice had been served and he could finally stop looking over his shoulder. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked how he felt. Dominic gave them truth instead of platitudes. "I feel grateful. Grateful I survived. Grateful for people like Savannah Hartwell, who taught me that survival isn't enough, you have to choose what comes next. And grateful that our justice system, for all its flaws, still manages to protect the innocent and punish the guilty." He fielded questions for 10 minutes, then excused himself. Savannah was waiting by his car, her presence now familiar enough that employees and board members had stopped being surprised when they appeared together. The relationship wasn't public yet, but it would be eventually. They'd agreed to wait until Preston's trial concluded so nothing could muddy the narrative of corporate executive brought to justice. That night, they made the relationship official. Dinner at a restaurant that specialized in privacy, where neither of them had to perform for cameras or maintain professional distance. They talked about everything except work. Savannah's childhood in Cambridge, Dominic's memories of his father, the strange fortune of two people finding each other because someone had tried to commit murder and failed. "If Preston's helicopter sabotage had worked, we never would have met." Dominic reached across the table, taking her hand. "I'm not going to be grateful for attempted murder, but I'm willing to acknowledge that good things can emerge from bad circumstances if we're stubborn enough to find them. Stubborn is our specialty." They returned to his penthouse, and this time Savannah didn't sleep in the guest room. In the morning they established a new routine. Therapy session at 5 a.m., work until 6 p.m., dinner together, walking practice in the evening. Dominic managing longer distances each week while Savannah filmed his progress for the documentation she was building. 1 year after the boardroom shooting, Dominic walked 200 consecutive steps. 2 weeks later, he made it from his car to his office without stopping, a journey that covered nearly 400 steps and left him exhausted but victorious. Savannah high-fived him in the parking garage, then immediately made him stretch to prevent muscle cramping. You're going to walk into the annual shareholders meeting next month, not because you need to prove anything, but because you can. The shareholders meeting was held in a hotel ballroom. 500 investors gathered to hear about Frost Technologies' performance and future direction. Dominic arrived in his wheelchair, same as he had for 3 years. But when it came time to present the annual report, he stood, walked to the podium, delivered 45 minutes of analysis and strategic vision while standing only sitting when it was finished. The applause was thunderous, not just for the financial results, though those were strong, for the visible evidence that limitation could be temporary if you fought hard enough and trusted the right people. After the meeting, Margaret Chen pulled Dominic aside. "The board wants to formalize something. We'd like to create an endowment in your name, the Dominic Frost Foundation for Mobility Innovation. Fund research, support accessibility programs, make sure what you and Savannah built here spreads beyond one company." Dominic's throat tightened. "That's incredibly generous. It's self-interested. Companies that don't adapt die. You've shown us that accessibility isn't charity, it's smart business. We're just making sure that lesson doesn't get forgotten after you retire." The foundation launched 3 months later with an initial endowment of $50 million, half funded by Frost Technologies, half by private donations from investors who'd watched Dominic transform tragedy into progress. Savannah became the executive director, splitting her time between running the internal program and building the external foundation. They moved in together officially 15 months after the boardroom shooting. Dominic sold his penthouse, and they bought a house in Cambridge close to Savannah's family, with a yard where her grandfather could walk safely and a first-floor bedroom for when his Parkinson's made stairs impossible. Henry Hartwell had improved on the experimental medication Dominic's foundation had funded, his tremors diminishing enough that he could read again without the words blurring. Grace Hartwell had quit one of her nursing jobs, the foundation's research grants funding a study she was co-authoring on caregiver burnout. The whole family had transformed, not because Dominic had thrown money at problems, but because he'd learned from Savannah that true help meant creating systems that empowered people to help themselves. On their 1-year anniversary as a couple, Savannah took Dominic back to the South Boston gym, where he'd first managed to stand for 7 seconds. Marcus Stone had the place to himself, having cleared the schedule for privacy. They set up the parallel bars and the cameras, recreating the setup from that first breakthrough. Walk from the door to the bars, no support, no harness, just you and your legs and everything we've built together. Dominic stood at the doorway calculating the distance. 70 steps minimum, more than he'd attempted consecutively before. His legs were stronger now, stable enough for daily walking around the house and office, but 70 steps in one attempt would push limits he'd been careful not to test. Savannah stood by the parallel bars, camera ready. "Whenever you're ready, or we can work up to this over a few more months." Dominic took his first step, then his second. The gym floor was marked with tape showing distance intervals, 10 steps, 20, 30. His legs were shaking now, muscles protesting the sustained effort. 40 steps, 50. He was past the halfway point, committed to finishing or failing spectacularly. 60 steps. His left knee buckled. He caught himself, redistributed weight, kept moving. 65. 70. He reached the parallel bars and gripped them with both hands, legs trembling so violently he thought they might give out entirely. Savannah stopped the camera, crossed to him, wrapped her arms around him while he steadied his breathing. "You just walked 70 steps without support. Do you understand what that means? That you're a better therapist than you give yourself credit for." She pulled back to look at him. "It means the paralysis didn't win. Preston didn't win. Fear didn't win. You did. By refusing to accept that wheelchairs were your permanent future. By trusting me enough to let me push you past every limit you thought you had. By being stubborn and brave and stupid enough to tackle an armed man when you'd only been walking for 2 weeks. Dominic kissed her, tasting salt from tears he hadn't realized were falling. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." "Good. Because alone is how people like Preston win. Together is how we build something they can never destroy." They stayed in the gym for another hour, Dominic resting while Savannah reviewed the footage. 70 steps documented in high-definition proof that the impossible could become routine if you worked hard enough and trusted the right people. That night over dinner at their Cambridge home with Henry and Grace and the life they'd built from the ruins of attempted murder, Dominic proposed. Not with theatrics, not in a restaurant or skyline venue, just at their dinner table surrounded by family holding a ring he'd chosen because the emerald matched Savannah's eyes. "I spent 2 years learning to walk again, but the real skill I had to relearn was trust. You taught me that. You showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness, and asking for help isn't failure. So I'm asking now, will you marry me and keep teaching me things I should have learned years ago?" Savannah's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. "Yes, on one condition." "Name it." "You keep walking, not because you have to prove anything, but because you can. And on the days when you can't, you use the chair without shame." "Deal." "Deal." They married 6 months later in a ceremony small enough to feel intimate and large enough to include the people who'd made their survival possible. Margaret and David and Linda from the board. Jackson Cole, who'd tracked down the evidence that put Preston away. Marcus Stone from the gym. The 15 employees from Savannah's accessibility program. Henry and Grace and Catherine Frost, who'd flown in from Denver with tears in her eyes and pride in her voice. Dominic walked Savannah down the aisle 143 steps from the venue entrance to the altar. His legs were steady now, strong enough for daily walking, though he still used the chair for longer distances. The wheelchair sat empty in the front row, symbolic recognition that recovery wasn't erasure, just expansion of options. The officiant kept it brief. They'd written their own vows, and Savannah went first. "I promise to push you when you need it and catch you when you fall. To remind you that strength comes in many forms, and walking is just one of them. To build systems that outlast our lifetimes, and prove that disability is just different ability waiting to be recognized." Dominic's vows were simpler. "I promise to trust you when trust feels impossible. To keep walking toward whatever comes next, knowing you'll be beside me, whether I'm on my feet or in my chair. To never stop fighting for the world you showed me was possible." They kissed as husband and wife. The applause that followed felt like validation for every impossible step they'd taken to reach this moment. Outside Boston carried on beneath November stars, oblivious to the quiet war that had been fought and won in boardrooms and courtrooms and therapy sessions that had rebuilt what treachery had tried to destroy. And inside, Dominic Sterling Frost, who had fallen from the sky and learned to stand again, finally stopped counting steps and started counting blessings.